Alright guys, what's going on? It's Jack and welcome back to another video. And guys, in just 1 week's time since XDefiant released, it has had quite a few milestones which surpassed even its own expectations. So the developers were expecting, or at least aiming for, 5 million total unique users, right? Within a month's time. And I am happy to report that as of right now, we are at about 8 million unique users after its first week of launch. And to top it all off, anytime you log in, there's over 750,000 concurrent players playing at any given time. So this is some great news. Now, obviously, this is across all platforms, just to be more specific. So this is great. I think even though it's been a week, I think it's safe to say that right now, so far, XDefiant has been on a very, very good starting path in reviving the arcade shooter genre, right? It is reviving it. I'm not saying it's revived it, because XDefiant itself, as well as the genre itself, to say the least, still has a ways to go, but this is a hell of a start. I mean, it's even gotten to the point to where there's words going around that Call of Duty Black Ops 6 might even reduce its skill-based matchmaking or whatnot, which is obviously awesome, even though I don't trust that one bit. But even if it were true, I think you and I can pretty much agree that it needs to be removed completely. Now, with that being said, as I've mentioned on this channel, right, there are historic facts that you cannot dismiss. So now there are historic facts that prove, or at least have some merit, to where XDefiant can actually make it all the way and totally succeed. Now, before we get into that, I almost forgot to mention that as of these last, I don't know, 24 hours or so, there have been some leaks about the entirety of the first year's content found within the XDefiant files or whatnot that somebody has digged up and found. And if you look on Twitter or X, and if you do a little bit of research, I'm sure you'll find all the nitty-gritty details about that. I will not be covering that here because I am sure that the devs were not intending for anything to leak. Obviously, they want to keep things under wraps. So out of respect for the devs that have given us a great game with no skill-based matchmaking that is only going to improve over time, they've given us transparency and everything so far and everything else. So for giving us what they've given us, you know, I respect them. So unless Mark Rubin over on Twitter himself gives me the green light to be like, yeah, cover that stuff, I don't care, whatever, I'm not going to be doing so, out of sheer respect for the devs or whatnot in terms of what they're trying to do. Now, obviously, there's been talks about the whole bundle stuff and the cosmetics that they're selling in the store. I really don't think the devs have anything to do with that. Just like Vonderhaar used to say, you know, I have nothing to do with the business side, guys. I just make video games. Vonderhaar himself said that during a Blackout interview with IGN or whatnot. So anyway, with that being said, okay, there are historic facts that can leave a lot of people very positive in terms of what XDefiant is striving to do and the fact that it actually can do this. Now, obviously, this example, this historic fact that I'm going to get into this commentary in terms of how XDefiant is not only reviving the genre of arcade shooters itself, but in terms of how it's going to continue to revive it and to do so and to carry on for years to come. The historic facts actually do not come from a shooting game. The historic facts actually come from a fighting game. In order for me to explain it to you so you can understand, I have to go back to the very beginning of this. So there was a fighting game franchise that came out in 1994 called Killer Instinct. And then it had a sequel, I believe the following year or the year after that. About a year or two later, they had a sequel. But the sequel obviously didn't do very well compared to the first. You know, the first was an amazing game, right? It got to the point to where not only was it a big fighting game for back in the 90s, that I was there to witness personally myself, by the way, in the arcades and on console and everything else. Fun fact, I actually owned the black cartridge that when the game released for the Super Nintendo, in which only the first, I think, 10 or 20,000 purchasers would be able to get, and I am one of those people. Oh no, I'm sorry, not the black cartridge, but the CD that actually came with the cartridge. But the cartridge itself was black. So I ended up getting the CD because I ended up getting the game as soon as it came out because I loved it in the arcades, etc., etc. But anyway, so that game came out in 1994, I believe, right? So it was nearly 20 years later, like basically after 95 or 96, after Killer Instinct Gold or Killer Instinct 2 came out or whatnot, right? The genre never made another sequel and it completely disappeared. And then it was around the late 90s to early 2000s for where the internet was a thing, and people were really talking about Killer Instinct in forums, and there were websites created about it, and people were like, there were petitions signed in order to get a game going or whatnot. And as the popularity of the internet continued to increase, what ended up happening is that there were more and more discussions having about Killer Instinct. And lo and behold, Microsoft took a note of this, and in E3 of 2013, Microsoft officially announced and showed a little bit of a bit of a trailer or whatnot of Killer Instinct. And Phil Spencer himself said, and I quote, "We listened, and Killer Instinct is back, only on Xbox One, blah, blah, blah." But anyway, so Killer Instinct, when it originally released, it was released free to play, but you only had access to one fighter, and there were only like five or six fighters in the initial release if you paid for like the entire thing. But it was really well priced in terms of what they did. You can purchase by the fighter if you wanted, or you can purchase the whole thing for like 20 bucks or whatnot, and you would have all the content that would be coming. And the thing is, it started out really slow. You only had a few fighters to have access to, as well as a few stages and a couple of other things here and there and stuff like that. And then over time, that small community that Killer Instinct was revived from ended up growing, and things got better and better and better. And what ended up happening was Killer Instinct ended up having the best, the best connection. They had rollback netcode for their fighting games, which is something that other fighting games like Mortal Kombat ended up adapting because it was so good and it felt really good. Because one of the biggest problems when it comes to fighting games online in versus mode or whatnot is the lag. So with Killer Instinct having this rollback netcode thing that felt really good for players, other games out there ended up adopting it. And what ended up happening is Killer Instinct got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it also had a lot of content over time, right? And a lot of players ended up supporting it because, not only because it was as good as it was, but also because of the fact that the game kept on getting worked on for the better and for the better and for the better. With every single patch, the game kept on feeling better. There were balances that were made and more content added to the game, more fighters and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of things that people had requested ended up making it into the game. And if there was something that was a little bit if players thought that there was something that needed to be happened or whatnot, it's like, okay, the developers looked at it and they're like, okay, what's the source of this problem? And then they looked in deep, and then after that they were able to fix the problem regardless of the fact that players said you need to do this. They ended up finding the better solution, and the next thing you know, the player base ended up shutting their mouths because it ended up being the right decision. But anyway, at the end of the day, Killer Instinct also had a very it's very easy to get into, but also very hard to master. Now, if you notice by now, there's kind of a pattern here happening with XDefiant, because when you're looking at XDefiant, it's a solid game, but obviously it does have its own problems. There are things that are going to be fixed, and there's going to be more content that's coming or whatnot. So in a way like Killer Instinct of 2013, which lasted all the way till 2017, and then later on, a few years later, after fans were still, like, people were still playing and such, but people wanted more, and they wanted more balances, and they wanted more stuff. The next thing you know, a couple years later, they were like, okay, they're gonna continue to do this. Now, granted, there hasn't been another Killer Instinct announced. Fans are hoping that there will be, but anyway, regardless of such, Killer Instinct, long story short, ended up becoming overall one of the best, if not the best, fighting games to come out in the last decade ever since its release. In other words, from 2013 to 2023, it is a game that is loved by so many. Like, when you get into the competitive aspects of it, it is so deep in terms of how big the skill gap actually is. But when you're talking about entry level as well, it is so easily accessible, which pretty much, when you think about it, does to a certain extent mirror what an arcade shooter like a Call of Duty or an XDefiant is, and what it's supposed to be, right? At heart, right? There could be a very big level of depth to the like ranked and competitive side in terms of how you take the objectives, how you use the fashions, how you strategize in order to win the game, right? But at the same time, to get into the game and to get into the basic fundamentals and work towards the path of mastery of those fundamentals is very, very easy. But what ended up happening was, long story short, Killer Instinct ended up becoming an amazing fighting game that was loved by many, and to where other fighting games ended up adapting some of the things that were implemented into those games. Those other fighting games were still what they were, like a Mortal Kombat, right? Mortal Kombat wasn't Killer Instinct by any means. It was still its own self. But it started implementing the rollback netcode that we were talking about and such. So what I'm trying to say is that if XDefiant, as well as it being supported by the community, the content creators, the streamers, and just the people overall that play the game, and as well as there's transparency going on and the devs keep on doing what they're doing, if you look at this historic fact from Killer Instinct, there is no way that this game that is XDefiant is not going to reach its goal. And remember, guys, XDefiant was never meant to be a quote-unquote COD killer. XDefiant is actually just trying to do its own thing. And so far, it is doing a really great job at that. And so far, Mark Rubin and crew have been really doing a great job with the transparency. Patty Aches, so to speak, and what's it called? Mark Rubin have been really transparent over on Twitter and X every single day, communicating with people. And in terms of what's coming, I'm really excited. You know, you guys can do your own little research on that. It wouldn't be hard to find it. I didn't have any effort to find it myself. It just ended up popping on my Twitter. So, but with that being said, the future is looking bright. We've had a hell of a start, and let's keep it going. And I'm very optimistic and happy about it. So let me know down in the comment section what you guys think. And yeah, that's all I got for this one, guys. As always, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to watch and or listen. And I'll catch you guys on the next one.